Greetings sailors, and welcome to my promised port video where I'm going to take a look at the stats of the new Japanese destroyers. Now I did promise this yesterday, but I had forgotten that it was Maxwell's 24-hour birthday stream, so I went and joined him for something like 8 or 9 hours, and we were playing Hearts of Iron 4 till about 5:30 in the morning. And it was quite fun, but I was quite tired at the end of that, so I wasn't going to then stay up more hours and try and do this, because this is the kind of video that requires a bit of concentration, because it involves going through a lot of numbers. I did have one comment under, I can't remember which video it was exactly, but it was one of my previous preview videos, where somebody described it as a numero auditory assault, because I was going very heavy on the numbers. And this video is going to be very heavy on the numbers, because I haven't really, as I said in the other video, I've played some games in these ships now, but not enough to have gotten, it's left us all scrambling. We got these at such short notice that everybody's been hard pressed to put something coherent together. And one of the important, I'm trying to think of the right word here, one of the key bits of groundwork that I do with my preview videos, my first look videos, is for warships anyway. It's plugging all the stats for ships into a spreadsheet. It's seeing how they fit in with other stuff at their tier. It's seeing how they fit in with other stuff of their nation. And that's exactly what I've done with the Japanese destroyers, the new ones. And unusually, and I think this is the first time I've done this, I'm actually going to show off the spreadsheet on screen, because it might actually help people, rather than me just saying a bunch of numbers, if they can actually see the numbers on screen as well. And I have, in the past, I've put like the spreadsheet on Google Docs and linked it in the thing below, but I might as well just cut out the middleman and stick it straight on screen. So we've started off with a tier 4 made available, and it is basically the Izokaze. Now, the naming conventions are such that what Wargaming have done is some of these, there's I think 3 or is it 4 new ships? It's 4 new ships, and for the ones that are versions or reimaginings, I don't know if that's the word, of existing ships, they have named them after ships of that class. So the Amatsukaze was clearly a Izokaze class destroyer that was built by Japan, and so it goes for all the rest of them. So it's not like the names of them are actually changing. This is just for the testing purposes, because you can't have 2 ships in the client with the same name. And you could have had like something clunky like the Izokaze brackets T or something, but they decided to go with what they went with, which is call them after ships of the same class. So it's not only, what I'm going to say at the top here is it's not only new ships we're getting, this is actually a rebalance of the Japanese destroyers to some extent as well. And I did mention this a little bit in the video I did the other day, I've got the name of it, it's right there. The Akizuki, there we go. It's a bit confusing to me, because there's the Akizuki, but then there's also the Akatsuki. And I keep wanting to get them muddled up in my head. And the Akatsuki is one of the new ones. This isn't one of the ones that's a rename of something. So that is a thing I am going to have trouble with in the future. I absolutely know it. So what we've got anyway is from the Izokaze up to the Kagero, or well, up to the tier 9, the new tier 9, the Yugumo. And whether this means, based on what I see here, that the tiers 2, 3 and the tier 10 ships are going to see some changes as well, I don't know. We haven't heard anything about that. Tier 2 and 3, maybe they're going to stay exactly the same, but based on what I've seen from the rest of the line, there might be 1 or 2 slight changes to the Shima as well. Or there might not. It might be completely unchanged at tier 10. So, before I actually start on the stats, we'll quickly throw up on screen via the expedient of me just opening the picture in Windows. I'm just doing a screen recording for this video. So here we see the branch is for the purposes of the video, we're just going to call it the main branch and the gunboat branch. So the split happens at tier 4 of the Izokaze. So from this Izokaze you go to the Mutsuki, the Fubuki, new ships obviously highlighted red, so you got the Akatsuki, the Kagero now at tier 8, the Yugumo, and then that leads to the Shima. And on this side we've got the Kamikaze and Hatsuharu, and then the Shiratsuyu and the Akatsuki. And I have to say, my impression just looking at the stats of the gunboat branch, tier 5 and tier 6 don't seem that different in the playstyle. There's some more minor differences, but I think it's once you get to tier 7 and tier 8 on the gunboat line that they start to feel quite different from the main branch. So enough waffle. We'll do a terribly professional alt tab. I should probably leave a bit of a gap when I'm talking, so yeah, I'll try and remember to do that. So hopefully that's the only time you see me alt tab, and I'll do some sneaky edits for the rest of it. So here we are, the famous spreadsheet. What I've tried to do is I've tried to compare like for like. So for instance, with the Izokazes both being at the same tier, the highlighted cells are ones where there are notable changes for better or for worse. And the Izokaze is largely, in a lot of ways, the same, but the main changes are to the torpedoes, but it also has a slightly lower reload. It's got a 2-second longer reload on its guns. Now, the torpedoes are the Type 92 torpedoes, but they have been fairly significantly nerfed. I don't know why I've highlighted that. That's not right. That irks me. There we go. The range is exactly the same. The damage has been significantly nerfed, and the speed has been significantly nerfed. You do get a slightly quicker reload, and you do get a slightly better torpedo detection range by 200 meters. So people will see them coming towards them slightly later than they do now. But this big drop, this is an over 10 knots difference in speed from what they currently have. So the Izokaze is a bit of a seal clubber's delight at the moment, and this is probably a needed nerf. Because it's sneaky, it's got fast reloading torpedoes, it's got fast torpedoes, and they do quite a lot of damage. So you can still do a fair amount of damage. It's not so much the drop in damage, I think, that's the biggest nerf. It's this change in the speed of the torpedoes. It's also been made slightly less stealthy. The base detection range has jumped by 200 meters to 6.1 kilometers. So, you know, with a concealment expert captain, you can still get that to being quite sneaky at 5.3 or thereabouts, but it's still a bit of a nerf. Also, I don't know why that's italicized. I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be going along and spotting all these little mistakes. Hopefully, I have gotten all the numbers accurate. You know, this has been me putting everything into this spreadsheet by hand. So if there's any mistakes that get spotted, it's just because I've put them in wrong. And I will also say the numbers I've put in here, these are the numbers from the ships that we have, you know, the preview versions of the ships. There is the very slight possibility, and it's happened in the past, that one or two stats might get changed. So if you're looking at, say, this column here, and one of these numbers is different for the ship when it gets actually released, that's because Wargaming has probably gone and done a final bit of tweaking. One thing I will note also, and I should probably do this at the start with this particular stat here, the best possible kind of stealth. This is combining, well, up to tier 7, obviously, camo and concealment expert, but it's in the actual spreadsheet, it's done via a formula. And the way that it works in, and I hope I've done that right, the way it works in the client is it gives you a 1 decimal place figure for the camo. So it's, you know, 6.1, 5.9, whatever. But clearly the actual camo figure runs to more decimal places than that. It's just the client rounds it off for display to the person using it. And so this figure here, because it's calculated from this starting figure, is possibly not always going to be 100% accurate, because I suspect the client always rounds down rather than rounding up. If let's say it's, you know, 1.55, I think the client would display that as 1.5 rather than, you know, 1.6. If that makes any sense. Or do I mean, like, no, maybe a better example would be 1.59 and it would display it as 1.5 rather than 1.6. So there's definitely one or two that I've spotted where this best possible camo figure doesn't quite match what's in the client, but it's the best, that the calculation will give, basically, because we only get that one decimal place. Anyway, so there you go, fun with spreadsheets. Next, at tier 5, of course, we have the fan favourite, another possible seal clubber. Does it count as seal clubbing at tier 5? Maybe. Anyway, the Minikaze. This is one I do have in my port. I've also got the premium Fujin, and there's also the Kamikaze, of course, which I don't have, but the Fujin and the Kamikaze are going to be unchanged, as I mentioned. So they're getting some kind of retroactive buffs, essentially. So that is being well. This is where the split happens. So the Yayoi here is the rejigged Minikaze, and then we've got the Okukaze, which is a Mutsuki. And I hope I've got that the right way around. Over to the spreadsheet, and well, we've got the existing stats here, and this is where. Bear in mind where I've said, I've compared like with the like. So this, these stats here, these represent differences from the existing Mutsuki. And as you can see, the Mutsuki having gone from tier 5, from tier 6 to tier 5, it hasn't changed a lot. Now, I've done my best to compare like with like. So the column, for instance, on the tier 6 tab, it's the Mutsuki C hull, and that's what we're getting. With a lot of these changes, we're basically getting the top hulls, and that goes for the ships at tier 6 as well. The Fubuki and the Hatsuharu are both, basically both their top hulls for that tier. So in this case, it's a Fubuki, not Fubuki, it's a Mutsuki C hull, which means you don't have a lot of firepower available. So how I've done it, by the way, is main branch, gunboat branch, and I've done that on every page. So the existing Minikaze, we'll talk about that first. That's a very well-known ship. The biggest changes are, it's the same Type 92 torpedoes from Tier 4, so they have the same changes. They are, again, I've not marked that, but they're slower, they're less powerful, essentially. But otherwise, the Minikaze is largely unchanged. And there's actually an interesting thing I noted in that at Tier 5, the shells haven't changed, but then you jump to tier 6 and the shells do change, and from tier 6 upwards, the gun stats, like the shell, the HE shells and the fire chance on the shells has actually been nerfed across the board, essentially. And I don't know why tier 5 is untouched in that regard. This is the thing that might change once the line goes live. So, yeah, the Minikaze is basically the same ship apart from this change in the torpedoes. The Mutsuki, interestingly, is basically the same ship, but dumped down a tier, including its hit points. It's got the same hit points that it has at tier 6. So, yeah, it's a 2x1 gun configuration. The reload, interestingly, given that this is the main branch ship and this is meant to be the gunboat ship, is faster, but obviously it's got half the number of guns of the Minikaze. And this is when I'm saying that the tier 5 and the tier 6 of the gunboat line don't really feel like they've been strongly buffed in the guns to make them feel more like gunboats. This kind of shows you what I mean. In terms of its gun stats, it's essentially unchanged. And the Minikaze's guns are not terrible, but I might have maybe expected it to get a second better reload or something like that. So, thinking of the line as a gunboat line as a whole is maybe a bit misleading, because the tier 5 and the tier 6, I wouldn't really say that they are, especially. So there you go. I'm trying to leave the stats on screen long enough that people could take a look for themselves, because obviously I've got the rest of the destroyers in there as well, so you can see how it fits in. But yeah, the Minikaze seems like it's going to largely be unchanged, and the Mutsuki does as well, up to and including the fact that it gets the Type 8 Mod 1 torpedoes at tier 5. But as at tier 6, these are quite slow torpedoes. They're 59 knots, but the reload is not too bad. So the Mutsuki, as the torp slinger at on the main branch, is actually going to be fairly powerful with these torpedoes, whereas the Minikaze, with the same concealment, essentially, is is actually now going to be less powerful. So I don't know if they've just shifted it over to making the Mutsuki the more powerful stealth torping ship, but we'll see how it shakes out on the live server anyway. At Tier 6 we have a pair of familiar ships. We've got the Ayanami, which is Hatsuharu, and the Wakaba, which represents the Fubuki. So the existing Tier 7 and Tier 8 have both been shifted down to Tier 6. And as I already noted, that means that they're basically going to have their top hulls in each case. So it's kind of interesting that Wargaming's done that. They don't let you make the choice that you get with the existing Japanese destroyers, where you can choose to get the as it is on some ships, the B hull with more turrets or the C hull with better AA. They've basically made that choice for you for whatever reason. So that's another small but possibly significant change to the IJN DDs. So at Tier 6 on the spreadsheet, that's the Mutsuki C hull stats. If you're using the B hull, you actually get an extra turret, of course. But like I said, I was comparing like with like. So the C hull is what you now get at Tier 5. The Fubuki and Hatsuharu obviously have lost health because they've both shifted down a tier. And this is, I mean, the Mutsuki didn't lose any hit points, and that's now, that's a pretty decent amount of health for a Tier 5 destroyer. The Fubuki's actually got a reasonable amount at nearly 13,000. The Hatsuharu's not much over what the Mutsuki had. Both have better rate of fire. They've both got 2 twin turrets though, so it's not like you're going to be pounding out lots of shells. And the Hatsuharu, especially on the air quotes gunboat branch, yeah, you've gained a bit of rate of fire, but this is where that nerf to the HE shells kicks in. You've lost 200 HE damage, which is not that significant, but you've also lost 1% fire chance per shell. I'm not entirely sure why they've done that. It actually, they were always pretty good with the HE shells, but they've now become a bit more average. They're now on a par with, in terms of damage, the US destroyers, and in terms of their fire chance, they're actually, let's see, the Soviets were on a par, but now they're worse than the Soviets, but still better than the US ones. So I'm not 100% sure why this fire chance drop has happened. It's only 1%, but it is there. The Fubuki's also had a slight nerf to its AA rating. The DPS is the same, but the outer envelope has shrunk a little bit. It went from 3.5 kilometers to 3.1 kilometers, so it's not much of a nerf, but it is there. They've also changed their torpedo loadouts. They basically have the same torpedoes that the Mutsuki had at Tier 6 with exactly the same stats, so 16k damage, 10 kilometers range, but quite a slow 59 kilometers per hour. So again, it's kind of difficult to see the difference between these two. This has a slightly faster rate of fire and a slightly better turret turn time, and otherwise they're not going to be that different in playstyle, especially not when they have essentially the same torpedo armament. This has 3 triple tubes and this has 2 triple tubes. That's the biggest difference between them. It's not like this has significantly faster or more powerful torpedoes. It's just the number of torpedoes that you can put out. So it's not a huge delineation in terms of, this is the gunboat, this is the torpedo stealth dropping ship. In fact, the Hatsuharu actually has a better concealment, and this is the supposed gunboat ship, whereas the Fubuki's now sitting at 7 kilometers versus the Mutsuki once upon a time having 6 kilometers, which was one of its biggest assets, because it's not it was a reasonably fast ship for the Japanese destroyers, but with the torpedoes being so slow, you had to get reasonably close to drop them. So the window in which you can drop torpedoes has shrunk a bit, and of course the Fubuki going from Tier 8 to Tier 6, it no longer gets the benefit of the concealment system. So the ultimate and best you can get is around 6.1, where before it was below 6, which the Hatsuharu can just about get below 6 kilometers. Tier 7 brings a pair of new ships, the Akatsuki, which I have to be very careful not to get mixed up with the Akizuki, and then the first of the proper gunboats, I would say, the Shiratsuyu. And this is where the gunboats at least get a little bit more interesting, and this one might be more worthwhile. Now this is, according to the information we're given, I think, okay, by memory here, it's a development of the Hatsuharu, and you'll recognise the Hatsuharu hull, the B hull, with this single third turret facing back to back with the rear double turret. So you've got at last more than 2 turrets, because this is one of the ways in which you could say Japanese destroyers have been nerfed. Through the mid-tiers, they've lost firepower. With them basically forcing you to use the top hull for what we have right now. Those top hulls quite often involve losing a turret, and so they now have less firepower. And this is the first where you start to get some of that firepower back a little bit. The Akatsuki has 3 twin turrets, which is in principle quite nice as well. But it's got 2 at the rear, which is more the usual Japanese style. And I find honestly 2 in the rear seems to be 2 turrets seems to be. I've just, having said that, caption guy could misconstrue that, couldn't he? It can be quite handy when you're running away and you've got the better part of your firepower available and you're engaging another destroyer. Anyway, let's do a look at the stats and see what these new machines look like. So, Tier 7, where we have quite a lot of destroyers actually. We've got not only the regular ones, but also, of course, the Błyskawica, the Leningrad, and the Sims. So they're on there as well if you particularly are desperate to compare the stats. Now, there's no colour coding on these columns because, of course, these are the first of the brand new ships that you will encounter. So we can compare them to the Hatsuharu B hull here that I've got. And as we can see, they both have more health, same calibre of armament, 3x2 guns on the Akatsuki, and of course that single turret plus the 2 twin turrets that I've pointed out in the Shiratsuyu. Both have the same rate of fire. Both have the same turret turn time. The range is actually better on the Shiratsuyu by a little bit, and the accuracy is probably about the same as well. Now, they've got the same shells as we saw in the previous tier, which are quite fast, but it wasn't anything you didn't have already. The differences, I think, more become apparent when you get to the torpedo armament, and crucially, this is the first of the gunboats. Well, I say the first of them. It's really only the Tier 7 and the Tier 8 that get it, where the reload booster for your torpedoes is in a separate slot, so you can use smoke, speed boost, and the reload booster. Whereas previously with I think the Hatsuharu could, I can't remember if the Fubuki can, but you can with the Kagero and the Shima definitely. You sacrifice, and I can't remember if it's smoke or the speed boost. I have a feeling it's the smoke, but yeah, you can sacrifice it and use the reload booster instead. And basically what the reload booster consumable does is, after you've fired off your tubes, you hit the 4 key for your reload booster, and in a couple of seconds you've basically got a more or less instant reload. It's not quite instant, it does take a couple of seconds, but it means that you can fire off your tubes, use the booster, fire off another set of torpedoes. And it's interesting that the gunboat line gets these, because it almost makes the Shiratsuyu in particular more potent as a torpedo dropping ship than the Akatsuki, which is on the main branch. Now at Tier 8, the Akizuki only has 1 set of tubes, but this doesn't. This has 2 quad tubes. And the biggest difference between them, I mean, they're basically the same. It's the Type 90 Mod 1 torps found at Tier 8 already. Exactly the same stats. The only difference is with the reload time. It's quicker than the current Hatsuharu on the Akatsuki, and being able to get out 9 torpedoes in one go is fairly powerful. But if you consider with the reload booster on the Shiratsuyu, you've got only 1 less torpedo. You can put out 8 torps, and then you hit the reload booster, which with the premium version, and hell, if you had the superintendent skill as well, that gives you an extra charge also. you can put out 8 more torpedoes seconds later. That's incredibly powerful. So again, although I think there's a little bit more difference now between these two, it almost feels like it's backwards. It almost feels like the Shiratsuyu should be on the main branch and the Akatsuki should be on this branch. And, you know, maybe have a few differences in the gun stats, because apart from this having a slightly worse range, they're not all that different. Maybe I overstated it a bit when it said it's tier 7 and 8 that they really start to become different. Maybe it really is only tier 8 where it feels like there's a proper difference between the gunboat line and the main branch. So yeah, that's where that difference kicks in. One other thing that I did note is that of the regular ships, if you've got your best possible concealment and you're using advanced firing training, this does in principle have the best stealth firing capability at tier 7. It's not as good as the Błyskawica with all the relevant everything, but you know, nearly 1.5 kilometers stealth firing range, more or less, is pretty good. It's actually slightly worse than the Leningrad, and it's definitely worse than the Sims, which apparently has got up to 3 kilometers potential stealth firing range, if I've done my sums correctly, which I should have. I think I've got 5.9, because it's 5.9 these days. So yeah, for the regular ships, you know, that's pretty good. 1.5 kilometers where you could fire around, run around and fire. So in that regard, I suppose you could say it's also the better gunboat, but it's kind of almost slim pickings. It still seems to be, just looking at the stats, a bit backwards, quite honestly. But then, hey, what do I know? At tier 8, we have the rejigged Kagero, which is not that different. I mean, it looks the same. The biggest difference is going to be changing the torpedo armament, as we shall see. And then we have the culmination of the gunboat line, and quite possibly the only true gunboat in there, that's the Shiratsuyu again, where I'm looking, the Akatsuki. And as you can see, I've been playing this one more. I've been a bit cautious about slapping on all the paint and the camo and the modules, because I don't have that many credits at the moment. And when you consider some of the modules cost, 3 million credits, 1 million credits, that 4.5 million credits would just poof, vanish in a puff of smoke. So there's only a couple that I've properly outfitted, and the rest I've just been playing slightly half-assed. Although I have been using my Kagero commander, because fortunately these preview ships act as premiums in that, if I can find it, you can basically plonk any captain in them. So I've been using my concealment expert Kagero captain, which does help out a lot. So in this case, it's doubly useful, because I mentioned in the Kagero video earlier in the week, when I had my best ever Kagero game, that this captain has AFT. Now, a lot of people said, in terms of captain skills, actually, at the high tiers of Japanese destroyers, survivability expert might be more preferable at tier 4. It might be a better first pick. Now, for some destroyers, they might want demo expert. There's probably not a lot of destroyers that really do definitely need AFT, and if I was doing this captain over again, I'm not sure I would pick AFT. But on the Shiratsuyu, the Akizuki particularly, AFT and especially BFT. I mean, BFT is just useful on a destroyer generally, but AFT is really useful, and once I tab over to the spreadsheet, you will see why. So here we are. First off, I'll do a quick rundown of changes to the Kagero. Now it's at tier 8. You actually get a better reload. Your reloads drop to 7 seconds. Again, the change to the shells. Again, a change to your torpedoes. You don't have the F3s available anymore. In fact, it's a completely different set of torpedoes than you had at tier 9. And the torpedoes seem to have stayed with the tier that they were at, rather than changing with the ship. The Mutsuki dropping from tier 5 to tier 6 seems to be the only one that's kept its torpedoes from tier 6. And in this case, it's the Type 93 mod, whatever it is, torps, which have just under 21,000 damage, 10 kilometers range, 67 knots. So, finally you're getting some torpedoes with decent speed up through the mid tiers. There has been a pretty big nerf to the torp speed, and it's only once you get to tier 8 tier 9 that it sort of comes out where it is at the moment. So, the reload, however, I mean, that's slower than the existing Fubuki with these torpedoes. So it is still kind of nerfed, but because it's a different kind of torpedo, it's I mean, they're basically these torpedoes here with a different with a longer reload time, but they are better in terms of their torpedo detection range than the F3 torpedoes if you use those on your Kagero at tier 9. Speed-wise, concealment-wise, everything is exactly the same. And so, apart from the torpedoes and the slight increase even in gun reload, the Kagero hasn't changed that much. And this is probably one of the ones I've played a bit more because I've got the Kagero in my port. The Kagero and the Yugumo I've been particularly interested in because I'm going to have both of those plonked in my port for free when the change occurs. And then we jump over to the Akizuki, which is something a bit different. Now, one thing that jumps out is the fact that this is the most healthy destroyer at tier 8. So having said what I said about captain skills, you know, that survivability expert skill will benefit the Akizuki even more. But the reason why I said AFT seems like it would be particularly useful, and it has been particularly useful, is if we go all the way down to the AA rating. We're skipping past the guns for now, but I will get to that. 158 DPS out to 5 kilometers, and the inner envelope is 3.1. Now, this is pretty monstrous. This is by far the best of the tier 8 destroyers. It's the best of the tier 9 destroyers, and it's the best of even the tier 10 destroyers. This thing beats the gearing for AA. Now, the gearing, of course, can mount the defensive AA in place of its smoke module. So a def AA gearing and a def AA Fletcher is probably still going to be more dangerous to planes overall. But yeah, it's a bit nuts. And of course, AFT and BFT will buff these figures even further. And you will have seen from that Akizuki gameplay that even to a same tier carrier, you know, that's enough AA power to actually be somewhat dangerous. And at tier 8, you know, against a tier 6 carrier, you hit P, turn on your anti-aircraft guns, and you're going to slaughter those planes. You're really going to... I mean, it's all RNG at the end of the day, but with that amount of DPS available, I mean, it's nearly double what anything else has at that tier. It's a bit nuts. Anyway, onto your primary firepower, and a reason, by the way, that part of this is so nuts that your primary firepower is dual purpose. Your 100mm also count as AA guns. You've got 100mm guns, and you don't have generally calibers that small outside of the you know, tiers 2, 3, and 4. If we jump back down to tier 4, we'll see the Clemson and the Izokaze are both sporting 102mm guns, which are probably, what, 4-inch guns? So it's around 4 inches at a guess. So you've got 4 twin turrets, 3-second reload, and with BFT you can obviously squeeze that down a little bit further. The turret turn time is a pretty whippy 11.3, and only the Benson beats that at tier 8. I haven't done the Low Yang numbers, that column is conspicuously empty, but the Low Yang and the Benson are going to be relatively similar. Range is 10.2, so it's nothing super special. It's only just over what the Fubuki has at that tier already. And for the shells themselves, well, 1700 damage per AP Citadel, 1200 for the HE, and 5% fire chance. So you've got the fire chance of the bigger American shells, but obviously it does less damage. In terms of the AP, from the comments I've read and from my own experience trying it out a little bit, it actually seems pretty potent considering its caliber. The HE, it's kind of like playing in Atlanta. It's the amount of shells that you can get out versus the individual damage per shell, and it's also the fact that that many shells gives you a much greater chance of setting fires, even though the individual fire chance is only 5%. The velocity is also spectacular. 1,000 meters a second is your shell starting velocity for both AP and HE. So you don't have to give that much lead, and that's going to throw people off maybe a little bit. I'm just trying to think if there's any other destroyers that have... No, this might be literally the fastest destroyer shells in the game. So this is of the new ships and of the supposed gunboat line. This is probably by far the most interesting one, is the Akizuki, and the guns are a large part of it. On to torpedo armament, it's the same Type 93 torpedoes with 10 kilometer range. You've got the same same reload as the Kagero with 2 quad launchers, and you've only got 1 quad launcher. So again, it's not that one loads faster than the other, or it has faster torpedoes or whatever. It's just this has, twice the number of launchers, and you can kind of make up for it with the reload booster. So honestly, I mean, the Akizuki feels really strong for its tier. It feels like a really nice little ship, and you actually got to see the reload booster in action in that Akizuki footage I showed you. It's just the combination of, you can essentially put out the same number of torpedoes as a Kagero several times in a battle. Not all at once, there's that few seconds delay while the booster does its work. But the potential is there. You've got these really fast shells. You fire 3 rounds a second is, not 3 rounds a second, that would be really slow. A 3-second reload, which is 20 rounds a second. That's better than the Benson, for crying out loud. That's known as having a very fast rate of fire. So it's just everything about it. If you're playing up that gunboat branch, this is what you're playing for. You're playing to get to the Akizuki, rather than, I think, playing them for their own merits, because they do kind of feel like the bits that you go through to get to this one quite unique ship. It's also got a bit of stealth firing capability, only about 1 kilometer though, potentially. Of course, at this tier, you've also got the possibility to put on a concealment system as well. So 5.3 is exactly the same as the Kagero in principle. And this is, I think, the first tier. Yeah, it's been the same or worse up till tier 7 in terms of concealment. And this is the first tier where the base concealment ranges actually start to overtake, or it's slightly better than the existing ship, the Fubuki. But it's only about 200 meters, but it's you have to wait till tier 8 to get that. Tier 9 is where we have another new ship, the Yugumo, and that is a replacement for the Kagero. It's just, of course, now the main branch ships we're talking about, because the other branch ended at tier 8. And as you can see on my Kagero, I've got the nice premium camo, which I will be getting on, I'll be keeping it on the Kagero. I'll be keeping the Kagero when it gets bumped down to tier 8. And I'll also be getting the premium camo for free on the Yugumo, basically, which is quite a nice change. So anyway, on to the stats. So, it's not too dissimilar from the Kagero, basically. The biggest change is probably in your firepower. You've got the same turret arrangement of guns. In fact, if I can pull that down slightly, you can see it's the usual Japanese thing of 2 in the back and 1 in the front. So it handles in that way basically the same as the Kagero. But your rate of fire is 5.7 seconds. That's actually a considerable improvement, and that puts you nearly in the range of the Udaloi, as you can see there. The turret turn time is actually better than the Kagero at the moment. And these are the kind of changes you would have expected to see on the, air quotes, gunboat branch. These kind of changes between new and existing, or the rejigged ones and the existing ones, in terms of firepower changes to make them feel a bit different. And it's only when you get to tier 9 and look, comparing the Yugumo to the Kagero, you think, you sure this isn't meant to be a gunboat one? But never mind. Anyway, so 5.7 seconds, 25.7 turret turn time. The range has dramatically increased over 1 kilometer. In fact, that's 1.5 kilometers to 11.1. And it's the same change in shells. So that's a slight nerf. It's gone from, did I say 1% earlier? It was 9%, wasn't it? It's dropped by 2%, going from 9 to 7. So yeah, the HE is a bit less potent, but it's not bad. And the fact that you've had that jump in firepower is pretty nice. AA rating is better than the Kagero has, but it's nothing as spectacular as the Yaki, of course. The torpedoes are the exact same options. You've got I say the exact same options. We'll have a quick look at the Yugumo, because you don't get the option of long-range torpedoes on this anymore. You get the Mod 2 torpedoes, which are 10 kilometers, and that's what you had at Tier 8, or you've got the F3s, which are 8 kilometers. So for these ships, for the ships we've been given a look at, the long-range torp options have been dropped. There's no 15 kilometer torpedoes at Tier 8 anymore, for example. And does that mean that the Shima will lose its long-range torpedoes? I don't know. I mean, this has not only been, I think I said this at the start, this has not only been an introduction of new ships, but it's been a rebalance of the entire IJN DD line, or at least a significant chunk of the IJN DD line. Anyway, speed actually better than Kagero, which will be welcome for most people. 35 knots is not fast, so 37.3 is quite respectable. That's actually better than the Fletcher. The concealment, however, is slightly worse than Kagero. It's 7 kilometers, so 200 meters worse, which is not so bad. This is one of those figures, by the way, where I know it's wrong. That should be 5.4, or it displays as 5.4 in the port, which means when it says 6.8 base detection for the Kagero in the port, it's probably like 6.87 or 6.88. And I only have one decimal place to go off, so that's why that figure then comes out wrong through the equation. With the bump in the firing range, though, even though you've got slightly worse concealment, you have a much bigger window, in fact a bigger window than the Udaloi for stealth firing, so that's been an effective buff to the Tier 9 of the IJN line as well. Lastly, well, I'll just let you look at the stats for the Tier 10, because why the hell not? I put them in the spreadsheet, I did the work, goddammit. I don't know if there are any changes coming to the Shima. I would speculate that even if nothing changes with the guns, they might remove the long-range torpedoes. I don't know. We haven't heard anything. If there have been any plans, maybe they've been keeping it to their chest. Or maybe the Shima's just going to be as it is now. It's going to be untouched. Well, we shall see. So there you are. No gameplay whatsoever. If you made it through all of that, which was me literally talking over a spreadsheet for most of it, then well done. What I'll try to do, I think, is put some timestamps in the description so people can pick out the individual ships that they are interested in and see how they've changed. Hopefully, I also managed to get all the numbers accurately inputted, and if you did spot any mistakes, then let me know. I can amend the spreadsheet on my end at least, and maybe put a notation on the screen if it's a particularly egregious error. But I think for the most part I've gotten it right, and it maybe gives you some idea of the changes that are incoming for the IJN DDs as a whole. So hopefully you found this useful. If you have, you can leave your thoughts and comments below. You can hit the like button, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.